I am going to, in the interest of time, now turn things back over to my co-chair, Dr. Nolan, for introducing our next speaker.
Thanks very much, Christine. So um, now we move ahead. I should have said in my opening remarks that we're delighted, and we planned it this way, that for each of the 3 days of the meeting, we'll have a keynote talk from a person with diabetes. Because I think that really helps to set the stage. And in fact, we've already heard from Tracy Brown, who talked about her own experience with type 2. I'm delighted now to introduce the next speaker, who is Dana Lewis. I think her details are going to come on here. Dana is living on the west coast of the US, and because of time, she in advance pre-recorded her talk for us, but I'm pretty sure that when we run her talk, she's going to be here, and we'll be very interested to take questions and answers from you and from us. Dana is very well known now in the field of diabetes because of her pioneering role as somebody with type 1 diabetes who's chased precision medicine for people with type 1 diabetes by using models of the artificial pancreas and that kind of closed loop approach to get precise delivery of insulin to improve quality of life. She has done a number of fantastic things in this internationally. She's the founder of a group called Open APS, Artificial Pancreas Systems, and she's written a book on the closed loop system with automated insulin delivery. So it's a real pleasure now to have Dana Lewis's talk, and then for you to have a chance to question her afterwards.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some perspective about the real life needs of people living with diabetes and why precision medicine matters for people living with diabetes. Precision medicine matters for people with diabetes because diabetes is hard. When you're diagnosed, you're given a bunch of generic recommendations that are treated as one size fits all, but they don't really work for everybody, and it's really hard to know what to do and what works right for you. For example, you're told to eat right, but what is eating right? There's a variety of different diets that are reported to work for people with diabetes, and it's hard to know what works for you. There's no one right answer, and the feedback loops on whether a diet are working or not is a really long time, and it's hard to figure out what's right to do for you. Similarly with exercise can drive your blood sugar levels up or down then up, and it can be hard to make it work for blood sugar management as well as getting your physical activity in. And then also taking your medicine, it's hard. Nobody wants to inject themselves or take medicine in order to stay alive, but that's what we have to do. But it's frustrating because you can do the same thing at the same time every single day and get a different response. That's true for your exercise, that's true for what you're eating, and that's true for the insulin or the medication that you're taking. And so it's really hard to deal with these constant change and this constant experimentation. It means really that this current standard of care in living with diabetes is actually imprecision medicine. And we do have some tools and technology, but they're not available to everybody. And the past tools that we have for managing diabetes, they're not good enough. We often rely on single point of time fingerstick blood glucose data or A1C as a summary of the last 3 months of diabetes. And that's just not helpful for living with diabetes and figuring out what do I need to do right now. A single point in time measurement is about as useful as a single data point for a pilot who's been flying for the last 3 months. It's just not useful. And the challenge with a single data point for a fingerstick blood glucose, for example, is that your brain wants to assume that that's what your blood sugar is, and it's not going to change. But the reality is your blood sugar is not going to be perfectly flat based on the data point that was your fingerstick reading. Your blood sugar might be dropping rapidly, or it could be rising rapidly. And you may be able to test your blood sugar multiple times in a day, but that doesn't tell you what's going on in between those individual data points. And also, you have no idea of knowing what's going to come next. So tools and technologies such as continuous glucose monitoring are a step forward, and they do allow us to fill in the gap of what's happening in between those single point in time measurements, and that's really useful. But it's still challenging to live with diabetes even if you have access to a CGM. Because again, there's a number of variables that are impacting your blood glucose at any given point in time, and they have different timelines of impact. For example, insulin. You may take short-acting, fast-acting insulin, and it might peak in 45 to 60 minutes, but it has an exponential decay curve, and it's lasting in your body for hours and hours. And so if you take multiple injections or multiple boluses in the course of a day, you may have multiple sets of insulin acting at different times. And similarly with food, you can eat something and do the same thing every single day and get different results based on not only your insulin timing, but how the food is reacting in your body and what your body needs and how it's responding to that food. And different combinations of foods also will react differently than if you eat them on their own. Exercise, as I mentioned, is also challenging because sometimes it can drive your blood sugar up or down. And it is also impacted based on the level of insulin you have when you start to exercise, the amount of food you have in your body when you start to exercise, and where your blood sugar was before. Because if you are too low or too high, there's other physiological effects that might kick in and also alter your blood sugar. And we have no way to know what those physiological effects are, such as hormones and sickness and stress, and how the body responds to them. You just have to respond. You're constantly responding to what seems like out of context data points and things that you know are happening that you can't measure and you have no control over. And so as a person living with diabetes, it can be really, really frustrating to have these vague tools that help some, but they don't show the complete picture. And so that's why we need more technology such as CGM, but more technology beyond that to get us to precision medicine and enable not only better outcomes for people living with diabetes, but we also want a better quality of life. We want to live better lives while living with diabetes. And we need these better tools to help personalize care and provide precision medicine because right now we don't have it. People with diabetes are often, when they're diagnosed, given these vague settings that are based on a generic formula, or maybe a clinical team is guessing based on the person's weight about how much insulin they might need for what they eat or to correct a high blood sugar, or what they might need on an hourly basis for their underlying insulin needs. That's really hard. Can you imagine as a clinical team if you actually had a tool that could say for this individual person what their insulin needs were for any given hour of the day and what their ISF would need to be and what their carb ratio would need to be? Well, imagine if that tool existed today, and it does. The open source diabetes community created such a tool because we saw our fellow community members struggling to figure out what their insulin settings should be because there weren't tools that their clinicians had, and they as people with diabetes didn't have the right tools to answer the questions. And so we built a tool that would categorize the data based on whether it was attributable to the basal rates or their ISF or to what they were eating to be able to segment the data and use that to tune basal rates, ISF, and carb ratio. It was designed for use in a closed loop system because we saw people using a closed loop would get better results if they had better input settings. But there was such high demand from people living with diabetes that we also made it work for people on standard insulin pumps without a closed loop, as well as people doing multiple daily injections. And the reality is this tool exists and other tools and technology exist that enable us to do more precision medicine for people with diabetes, and we should and need to use them. But we often get pushback when we start talking about some of the tools and technology for precision medicine because some of these tools were created by patients. But why are patients creating the tools? They're creating the tools and DIYing as a symptom of a broken system that has failed them. There are gaps in the system and there are cracks that patients with diabetes are failing and falling through, and they're struggling. The reality is, as a patient living with diabetes, the only current way to do precision medicine for most patients is to do it ourselves. I know this very well. There has been an absence of tools to do precision medicine for living with diabetes for a very long time. Back in 2013, for example, I was asked to bring data to my doctor so he could review how things were going for me. But the reality was in 2013 that I didn't have access to the FDA-approved software with my medical device, with my CGM. So in order to get my CGM data from my device, I had to take my phone out of my pocket every day, take a picture of my CGM graph, email it to myself, copy and paste it, and then print it out and hand it to my doctor. And that's what we used to analyze my quote-unquote diabetes data. It was absolutely unhelpful as an exercise. And the other reason I like to show this picture is to illustrate that this was a supposed good week for me. I was educated, I had access to insulin, I had been educated with diabetes education, I had a CGM, I had a pump, and yet look how many times my blood sugar went out of range on that week and on a day-to-day basis. You can see several of those pictures. I was just constantly going high and low and then high, then low, all day, and every night. And it was incredibly frustrating. And I went to the companies and asked for louder CGM alarms because I thought if I woke up to my CGM alarms instead of having alert fatigue and sleeping through them, that would enable me to be able to respond and adjust to at least some of the overnight fluctuations in blood glucose levels. But the companies would tell me that they were working on louder alarms and different alarms, and they would get to it in their next version. Well, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years rolled around and nothing changed. The time to bring technology to people with diabetes is 5 to 10 years, and that cycle is absolutely too slow. And so that's why patients like me have begun to build our own tools and our own technology, because we have to. Otherwise, we are suffering, and we are suffering every single day and every single night. I've been living with diabetes for over 18 years. And it took me until 2013 when I was able to start creating my own tools and really changing quality of life of living with diabetes for myself. I was able to access an open source tool by somebody who had built a way to get CGM data off my CGM device in real time. I was able to upload my CGM data to the cloud. And using that, I was able to add proactive alerts and alarms and louder alerts and louder alarms. And it was absolutely game changing, because I was able to not only say my blood sugar was high or low and that I needed to take action, but I was able to add this predictive algorithm that would predict into the future what was going to happen and give me a heads up that my blood sugar was going high or low and encourage me to take action and pay attention. And it really allowed me to go from reactive to proactive. And that was such a game changer, because in manual diabetes, the human is in charge of being aware of their body, their glucose, whether that's a finger stick setting or a CGM graph, and understanding when they've dosed insulin and how much they've dosed it and when it's going to take action, what they've been eating, if they're going to be exercising, what's going to be happening in the future. All of this in their head all day, every day, throughout the day. It's so hard to do over and over again. And that shouldn't be a job that people with diabetes are doing when technology can do that job. And that's the beauty of technology in these new tools, is that they can look at the CGM data, they can look at the insulin dosing data and have the exponential decay curves of when insulin is taking into effect in the body. And it can make decisions every single time a new CGM data point comes in about how much insulin is needed, and to do it very, very precisely. A computer doesn't get lazy. A computer doesn't round up or down. A computer can be incredibly precise. And that's the hallmark of precision medicine, is doing the right thing at the right time for the person living with diabetes. And that's what I was able to do, is to go from having my CGM data in real time in the cloud, to building louder alarms, to building that proactive algorithm, to then being able to close the loop and having a full closed loop system that I've lived with for more than 6 years. If you've heard of OpenAPS, the open source artificial pancreas system, or other DIY closed loop systems, that's where it all came from, was the need to have these tools to not only make a louder alarm, but then realizing we could take small steps to build these algorithms and to make these predictive systems that they could then send commands to our pump and adjust insulin automatically so that we humans don't have to. And it worked incredibly well. Again, these were my graphs before: high, low, all day, every day. So frustrating. And now today and every day for more than 6 years, I've had graphs that look like these: straight line after straight line after straight line. So many fewer incidences of hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia, to the point where I calculated last year that I was woken up more times by my fire alarm in my apartment building in 2020 than I was from living with diabetes and having hypoglycemia and having an alarm go off. So it wasn't just about increasing the alarms and the alarm volume on my system, but reducing the need for alarms completely by managing my blood sugars automatically using an automated insulin delivery system. So there's tools and technology for precision medicine. Closed loop or automated insulin delivery system is not going to work for everybody. CGM, people may not want to wear it all the time, but we have tools and technologies, whether it's a one-off use of technology, whether it's for retrospective analysis, whether it's something that somebody wants to wear all the time. We have tools and technology where we can improve the quality of life of people living with diabetes. And the reality is, patients are constantly experimenting and constantly learning what they need to do to stay alive and to improve their quality of life. And so essentially, we're doing precision medicine ourselves because we have to. Healthcare right now is not providing precision medicine to people with diabetes, and we need healthcare to change. We need healthcare to provide and constantly improve precision medicine tools for patients, and we need it to happen more quickly. The reality is, we all have the same goal, which is improving and saving the lives of people with diabetes. But the reality is, we can't afford to wait. People living with diabetes are struggling today with a handful of tools that are 20, 50 years old, and they're better than nothing, absolutely. They keep us alive, but we can do better than staying alive. We can thrive when living with diabetes, and we shouldn't have to wait. We have the tools to do precision medicine and diabetes today. And so I hope from this presentation or the rest of the conference, if you are feeling like you have ideas or you have motivation to take action and to do precision medicine or help bring precision medicine to more people living with diabetes, I hope you do so. If you needed a sign, I hope this is the sign that you've been looking for. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for all that you do for people with diabetes. And please join us when we say we are not waiting, because we people with diabetes can't afford to wait. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana, for that excellent talk. I'm not sure if you're with us right now.
I am.
Oh, you are? Oh, Dana, great. Thank you very much. I'll just put on my video here. I'm trying to get the technology. Dana, great to see you. Thank you very much for an inspiring talk. So that really sets the scene for issues around precision in type 1 diabetes, and precision being actually delivering insulin minute by minute in the way that an individual requires, which is highly, highly personalized. So Dana, we have time now. Thank you for doing that in advance because of your time zone, and thank you for getting up at a very early hour this morning to be with us. We have good time for questions and answers. So maybe I'll start off by saying, how do you see this going ahead in terms of your network and our initiative, this Precision Medicine for Diabetes initiative? Have you any thoughts on that, Dana?
Well, I think leveraging the previous conversation, I think there's a lot of partnerships and a lot of collaborations. We've actually seen from the diabetes community some interesting collaborations with the diabetes companies working on this technology. For example, there's some companies actually leveraging the technology that we have created in some components of their commercial closed loop systems. But I think there's opportunities for organizations such as EASD and ADA to work more closely and more proactively with patients and think about partnerships with patients, not just as a, hey, we have a token patient on a panel, but actually involving patients fully and driving the agenda and figuring out what needs to be done. And as I remarked earlier, I think there's opportunity to think about small changes more quickly instead of just thinking about, okay, a 10-year vision or a 20-year vision of what precision medicine looks like, but what could we do in the next days and weeks and months that really impacts people living with type 1, type 2, all types of diabetes? I think there's immediate next steps. And I think that partnership with patients and with that diabetes community is going to be really, really powerful for figuring out what is the meaningful, quick next step that is quick, is maybe easy, is maybe low cost, and is perceived to be, easy to do, but has really, really high impact for people living with diabetes.
That sounds very inspiring and very, very much on focus. Dana, I'm not sure if you were there earlier on when Tracy Brown from the ADA spoke, but she said some similar things to you, i.e. that the power of the people with diabetes community is so huge and so important in terms of setting the agenda and deciding where we go with these initiatives. So I think that point is very well made. There's a question here. Let me just see. Yeah, there is a question here for you, Dana. It's from Dr. Mohan. It's when you use the DIY sort of tools that you're using, is there a risk there of errors occurring in terms of insulin dose calculation and so on? That's a sort of a safety question.
It's a great question, and yes, but less so than the errors present when humans are doing the math ourselves. And so one of the core principles, for example, in the open source community with OpenAPS is safety first. And if you go and look at the OpenAPS reference design, you can actually see all of the safety guards that we've written into the algorithm and the safety checks and the safety gates that we've actually put into our system. And one thing, speaking of the partnership with companies, one thing I love about our safety development is our safety gates are actually being used by a commercial automated insulin delivery system in France, where our safety checks built by the open source community are checking the machine learning algorithm of a commercial system. And so, yes, errors are possible, but we as people with diabetes are very, very motivated to not have those errors cause harm, because obviously it's our lives that we care about. And so we've not had serious, adverse effects or bad outcomes from that, because we obviously keep choosing to use this technology, but also our safety engineering is being used by commercial companies, which I think shows how important that is to us. But I think all of this technology, there's opportunities for bad things to happen, but we also can't just compare that to what would happen without this technology, but what happens in the daily lives of people living with diabetes, where errors are made all the time with insulin dosing, mistakes are made all of the time. And so you have to look at the net risk evaluation of adding technology such as this, whether it's DIY or commercial technology, and actually the harm overall is significantly reduced by adding this technology. And so I think it's an important conversation to have about safety always. absolutely welcome that question. But I think, again, we have to compare it to what happens without this technology, where humans are having hypo and hyperglycemia as a result of their own actions every single day.
John, you're on mute.
That's the typical mistake. No, we can't let it pass that, your results are stunning. Any clinician who's looking at your talk and sees your pre and post, it's amazing. So I think that's highly, highly convincing. And also your point, Dana, which I think is a very important one, is quality of life. Sleep is so important, and the anxiety of waking up every night. There are some questions, some very good questions here. Here's one. How do you see this technology moving into very remote places in the world, or serving people who have less access to technology? Have you thoughts on that, Dana?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think there's oftentimes a lot of focus on technology for real time and assuming everybody wants to use every single technology. But there's a lot of ways that this technology can be translated to retrospective or kind of point in time analyses. So for example, you could maybe get access to a CGM for one person for 1 week, run their data, use something like AutoTune, and be able to provide them settings that work for the next couple of years more accurately and more precisely than kind of guessing based on their weight, for example. So there's opportunities to take these tools and use them as a one-off, or think about ways to apply them to differently resourced countries where people maybe don't have CGM, but maybe some of this dosing decision could be turned into a tech support system where people could send fingerstick data readings or send questions, written in plain language, and get back results from the algorithm. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to translate this technology. But again, it's thinking creatively about what are the existing data points, what are the tools, what are people willing to use, and then figuring out a way to make it work. But I think there's some fantastic opportunities there. But again, it involves thinking creatively about what are the challenges of those people living with diabetes, what tools do they have, what problems do they want to solve? And there's usually some low-hanging fruit of applying this technology to those areas.
Great, Dana, thank you. There's one quick last one then, because we need to move on, but it is a very good question. It's just how can you enter exercise into the automated system to modify the delivery of insulin? Say if you go out for a 5K run, how do you do that?
It's a great question. Different systems do it differently. In the open source community, we use different temporary targets where you can set a target higher. In OpenAPS, we also have settings that you could turn on where that also changes things like your insulin sensitivity. And we also have a feature that detects if your sensitivity changes over time called auto sensitivity. So if you do a 5K usually, but suddenly you run a marathon and you're very insulin sensitive, it actually picks up that sensitivity over time. And then as you come back to normal, it will gradually resolve on its own. So we have ways for users to enter information to the system and also ways to detect some of it automatically.
Okay, Dana, there are more questions coming in now. We're stuck for time. We need to go on. I want to thank you for a fantastic talk. I think you've really set us alight with some new thoughts about precision for type 1 diabetes. And thank you so much for participating today. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
I'll pass on to Dr. Lee now to introduce the next speaker.
And thank you.